The first time my nephew told me I didn't need my own workshop anymore, he was standing behind my chair. I hadn't even heard him come in. That place used to echo when the door opened, but that morning I was lightheaded, slow, like I hadn't slept right. He stepped around me, set a folder on the bench, and said it in a calm voice. "You don't use this space like you used to." I remember looking at him and thinking how strange it was that he sounded so certain, like a decision had already been made. A year earlier, he had come to me asking for help fixing an old desktop, said he couldn't afford a repair shop. I told him to bring it over. One computer turned into 5, then 10. Soon he was working at my bench 3 or 4 days a week, fixing laptops for his friends. I didn't mind. I showed him how to test a power supply, how to clean corrosion off a board, how to be patient with wiring. He called it our little operation, but it was never ours. That morning, as I tried to steady my hands on the edge of the table, he slid the folder closer to me. "It's time to think about the future," he said. And that was when I realized he hadn't come to fix anything that day. 13 months ago, my workshop in Tulsa was my sanctuary. I'd spent 40 years as an industrial electrician, and that brick building behind my house held every tool I'd ever bought, organized exactly the way I liked. When my nephew Tyler showed up on my porch with a broken tower and a desperate look, I felt a spark of purpose. His father, my brother, had passed away 3 years prior, and I felt I owed it to the family to look out for the boy. He was 24, drifting between retail jobs, and seemed to have a knack for electronics. I told him the shop was open to him. I gave him a key. I gave him my trust. At first, it was respectful. He'd ask before moving a soldering iron. He'd clean the bench before he left. But by the 4th month, the rhythm changed. He started bringing in boxes of hardware from liquidations. The smell of ozone and flux began to be replaced by the stale scent of energy drinks and cardboard. He'd stay late into the night, the blue light from monitors flickering through the windows. I'd walk out there at 10 at night to check the locks, and he'd barely look up. He started calling it the lab. By the 8th month, my vintage testers and oscilloscopes had been pushed into the corner to make room for his server racks. I went to find my favorite wire strippers one afternoon and found them buried under a pile of discarded plastic casings. When I mentioned it, he didn't apologize. He just sighed, like I was the one making things difficult. "I'm trying to scale this up, Uncle Jim," he said. "We need to be efficient." He'd stopped asking. He'd started telling. And as I stood there in the present, looking at that folder, I realized the efficiency he didn't want to include me. The folder Tyler pushed across the bench was thick, filled with printed spreadsheets and a contract from a local logistics company. He didn't wait for me to open it. He started talking about optimization and liability, words that felt cold in a room where I'd spent decades building things with my own 2 hands. He explained that he'd landed a contract to refurbish fleet tablets for a delivery service in Tulsa, but the facility wasn't up to professional standards. "I've already had a private inspector come through while you were at your doctor's appointment last week," he said, his voice flat and clinical. "The wiring in here is antiquated. The storage is a fire hazard. If I'm going to run a real business, I can't have the owner of the property tinkering with old radios in the middle of a production line." I felt a sharp heat behind my eyes. "The owner of the property is me." "Tyler," I said. "On paper, sure," he replied, leaning back against my heavy oak workbench, the one I'd built with his father in 1988. "But you're 74, Jim. Your hands shake when you pick up a multimeter. You're a hazard to the insurance policy I'm trying to pull. I'm doing you a favor. I'll give you a monthly consultation fee, and you can stay in the house. But the shop needs to be mine. Totally mine." I looked past him at the wall where my father's wrenches still hung. He'd already moved them. They were in a plastic bin on the floor, covered in dust from a belt sander. I realized then that the little operation had been a siege. He had used my grief for my brother and my pride in his success to walk through the door. And now he was changing the locks. You're asking me to give up my life's work because you have a contract? I asked. I'm asking you to step aside before you hurt yourself or the business, he snapped. The papers in that folder are an offer to lease the building for 10 years at a fixed rate. It's more than you'd get from anyone else. He didn't mention that the fixed rate wouldn't even cover the property taxes in 5 years. He stood up, towering over me in the cramped space, and checked his watch. Think about it, but don't think too long. The trucks arrive Monday morning with the new workstations. He walked out, leaving the door wide open, letting the humid Oklahoma air rush in to settle on my tools. I reached out to touch the bench, but my fingers hit a cold plastic laptop cooling pad instead. He hadn't just taken the space. He'd already erased me from it. Monday morning came with the sound of a diesel engine idling in my driveway. I stood at the kitchen window, coffee cooling in my mug, watching 2 men in gray uniforms unload heavy crates from a box truck. Tyler was out there with a clipboard, gesturing toward the wide double doors of my workshop like he was directing a symphony. He didn't knock on my door. He didn't ask if I'd read the papers in the folder. He just started moving in. I walked out across the grass, my legs feeling heavy. When I reached the threshold of the shop, I saw one of the workers sliding my old drill press across the concrete floor to make room for a metal rack. The sound of metal screeching on stone set my teeth on edge. "Careful with that," I said, my voice sounding thinner than I wanted. "That's a 1950s Delta. You'll knock it out of alignment." The worker didn't even look at me. He looked at Tyler. Tyler didn't look up from his clipboard. "Just put it in the back corner with the rest of the scrap," he told the man. Then he turned to me, his eyes hidden behind polarized sunglasses. "Jim, I told you the trucks were coming. You're in the way of the installers." "It's a safety issue." "This is my shop, Tyler," I said, stepping further into the room. "I haven't signed a thing. You can't just throw my equipment into a corner like junk." He finally looked at me, and there was no warmth left in his expression. It was the face of a man looking at a technical glitch he needed to patch. "We talked about this. The contract is signed on my end. I've already paid the first month's rent into your bank account. I have your routing number from when you helped me with that car repair last year." I felt a cold shiver of realization. He had gone into my files. He'd used the help I'd given him as a back door into my life. "That wasn't an agreement," I said. "That was a theft." "It's progress," he countered, stepping closer. "You're getting a check for doing nothing. Most guys your age would kill for that. Now please, go back to the house. I have 1,200 tablets arriving tomorrow, and I don't have time to debate the floor plan." He turned his back on me and started barking orders at the movers. I stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of 40 years of work, watching my life being boxed up and pushed aside. I looked at the workbench and saw a stack of new, high-density foam organizers where my hand planes used to sit. I walked back to the house, but I didn't sit down. I went straight to the hall closet and pulled out the metal lockbox where I kept the original deed to the property. My hands were shaking, but not from age. They were shaking with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. Tyler thought he was playing a game of business, but he'd forgotten that in the real world, you don't own the kingdom just because you've occupied the throne room. By Tuesday morning, the workshop had been transformed into a cold, clinical assembly line. Tyler had installed bright LED strips that hummed with a high-pitched whine, and the air smelled of sterile plastic and shipping foam. I watched from the back porch as a white van pulled up, and 3 young guys in branded polo shirts hopped out. They were his now employees. They walked into my building like they owned the ground they walked on, laughing and carrying boxes of components. I walked out there at noon. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of his crew, but I needed him to see that I wasn't just fading away into the wallpaper of the main house. When I stepped inside, the noise was constant. The clicking of plastic housings, the hiss of compressed air, and the rhythmic thud of a label printer. "Tyler," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the fans. He didn't look up from a tablet he was inspecting. "Not now, Jim. We're in the middle of a diagnostic run. If you're looking for your old soldering station, it's in the shed behind the garage." I had the guys move it this morning so we could fit the fourth workstation. The shed isn't climate controlled, I said, my voice tight. That equipment is sensitive. You're ruining things you don't even understand. He finally looked at me, sliding his anti-static glasses up onto his forehead. He looked at me with a pity that felt like a slap. It's old tech, Uncle Jim. It's obsolete. Just like the way you want to run this place. I'm building a future here. I'm actually making the family name mean something in the tech sector in Tulsa. You're using my name to sign contracts you can't back up without my property, I replied. The room went quiet. His 3 employees stopped working and looked between us. Tyler's face darkened, the professional mask slipping to reveal the arrogant boy underneath. He walked over to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Listen to me very carefully," he hissed. "I've already invested $40,000 of my own credit into this setup. I have a deadline. If you interfere with my production or embarrass me in front of my staff again, I'll have my lawyer file for an injunction. I'll claim you're mentally unfit to manage the property and have a third party appointed to oversee your affairs. Don't think I won't do it. I've been keeping a log of every time you've been confused lately." He reached out and patted my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look affectionate but felt like a threat. "Go back to the house and watch your programs, Jim. Let the adults work." I walked out, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't go to the house. I got into my truck and drove to the county clerk's office downtown. I needed a certified copy of the commercial zoning permit for that auxiliary building. Tyler thought he was a shark, but he was swimming in waters where he hadn't checked the depth. He'd forgotten that while he was busy scaling up, he was doing it in a building that was still legally a residential hobby shop. And in this neighborhood, the city took a very dim view of unauthorized industrial activity. The drive back from the county building was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a moment, looking at my workshop. It was a sturdy brick structure I'd built with pride, now humming with the sound of an illegal enterprise. Tyler had spent a year slowly pushing me out, using my grief and my workbench to build a cage for me. He really thought a folder and a few threats about my mental health would be enough to make me surrender. I walked into the kitchen and found Tyler standing at my sink, rinsing out a coffee mug like he lived there. He didn't turn around when I entered. "I hope you spent the afternoon cooling off, Jim," he said, his voice dripping with that new, patronizing tone. "I don't want any more tension. It's bad for the team's productivity." "I spent the afternoon at the city planning office," I said. He froze, his hands still under the running water. He turned the faucet off slowly and faced me. "What did you do?" "I checked the permits for the shop," I said, leaning against the counter. "When I built that place, it was permitted as a residential garage and hobby space. To run a commercial logistics and repair hub with employees and daily freight deliveries, you need a different classification. A classification this neighborhood isn't zoned for." Tyler's face went from smug to a sickly shade of gray. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't sabotage your own property value." "It's not a bluff, Tyler. I've already filed a formal inquiry regarding the change of use," I said. "The city inspector will be here tomorrow morning at 9. They'll see the industrial workstations, the lithium-ion storage, and the fact that you've modified the electrical mains without a licensed contractor's permit." He stepped towards me, his face twisted in a snarl. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I have a contract. If I don't deliver those tablets, I'm liable for the full value of the hardware, over $100,000. You're destroying me. You destroyed this family when you started using your father's memory as a way to steal from me," I replied. "You told me I didn't need this space anymore. You told me I was a hazard. Now, you're going to find out what a real hazard looks like." He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked like he wanted to hit me, but he saw the look in my eyes, the look of a man who had already lost his shop and had nothing left to fear. He realized that for the first time in a year, he wasn't the one in control. "You have until 9 tomorrow to get your people and your hardware out of my building," I said. After that, the doors get locked, and anything inside becomes evidence of a zoning violation. That night, The workshop was a hive of frantic, desperate activity. I sat in my dark living room, the only light coming from the street lamp hitting the dust on my shelves. Through the window, I watched Tyler and his crew hauling crates back into the white van. They weren't laughing anymore. There was no talk of optimization or the future. It was just the sound of heavy breathing and the occasional muffled curse as they bumped against the walls of the building I had built with my own hands. Tyler came to the back door around midnight. He didn't knock like a nephew. He pounded like a man who was drowning. When I opened the door, he looked haggard. His expensive polo shirt was stained with sweat, and his hair was a mess. "Jim, please," he rasped, his voice losing all its edge. "I can't move it all by morning. The lithium batteries alone require special transport. If I just leave them in the driveway, I'm breaking a dozen safety codes. Give me 3 days, just 3 days to find a warehouse." "You had a year to be a man, Tyler," I said, standing firm in the doorway. "Instead, you spent that year treating me like a ghost in my own home. You told me I was obsolete. You told me I was a hazard." "I was stressed. I was trying to make something of myself," he shouted, his eyes darting around the yard. "If I lose this contract, I'm bankrupt. My credit is gone. Everything I've worked for—" "Everything you built on top of my life," I corrected him. "You didn't work for this shop. You didn't work for those tools you threw in the shed. You just took them because you thought I was too old to stop you." He looked at me then, and for a second, I saw the little boy who used to ask me how a circuit worked. But then his face curled into something ugly. "You're a bitter old man, Jim. You'd rather see me in the gutter than see me succeed. I'd rather see you honest," I said, and I closed the door on him. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I listened to the van come and go 3 more times. I listened to the metal door of the shop roll shut for the last time at 4 in the morning. When the sun finally came up over Tulsa, the silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. At 8:55, a city car pulled into the driveway. I walked out to meet the inspector, a man in a tan uniform with a clipboard. Tyler was nowhere to be seen. His van was gone, and the only thing left in the driveway was a pile of discarded shipping pallets and a single, broken tablet lying in the dirt. I led the inspector to the shop doors and pulled out my heavy ring of keys. My hands were steady. The inspector didn't stay long. He walked through the empty shell of the workshop, noting the scuff marks on the concrete and the heavy-duty electrical drops Tyler had installed without a permit. I didn't offer excuses, and I didn't tell him about my nephew. I just told him I had cleared out a tenant who had overstepped the residential limits of the property. He wrote me a fix-it ticket for the wiring, gave me 30 days to bring it back to code, and left. By noon, the neighborhood was quiet again. I spent the afternoon hauling my old equipment back from the shed. My Delta drill press was heavy, and my back ached as I winched it across the floor, but I didn't mind the work. I wiped the dust off the cast iron and checked the alignment. It was still true. One by one, I put my father's wrenches back on the wall, exactly where they belonged. Tyler never came back to apologize. A week later, I received a series of frantic emails from his lawyer, threatening to sue for the unlawful disruption of business operations. I didn't reply. I simply forwarded them to my own attorney, along with the city inspector's report and a copy of my deed. The threat stopped after that. I heard through a cousin that Tyler had to move back into a small apartment in South Tulsa. His credit ruined and his contract canceled for failure to deliver. I sat at my oak workbench as the sun began to set, the orange light stretching across the floor. My hands still shake a little, and I don't move as fast as I once did. I realized then that Tyler was right about one thing. I don't use this space like I used to. I don't need to run a production line or land $1 million contract. I picked up a broken radio I'd found at a garage sale years ago. I opened the casing, found a loose wire, and reached for my soldering iron. I gave my nephew everything he needed to build a life: tools, trust, and a place to grow. He was the one who decided that wasn't enough. I am 74 years old. I own my home, I own my shop, and for the first time in a year, I can hear myself think. I stayed in my chair until the room went dark, listening to the quiet of a house that finally belonged to me again. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. There's more to come.